He saw her scar by mistake and uncovered her secret. She never expected this. Commander Mark Shannon would be the first to admit that this was a terrible idea. We shouldn't, the very alluring, violet-skinned alien beneath him whispered as his lips traced along her collarbone, fingers moving to the clasp of her uniform. I'm your superior officer. Alas, he couldn't quite bring himself to care. While he liked to consider himself a man in control of his own faculties, he would admit to at least one vice. The ladies. And it was a vice that only grew in moments of frustration. The last few cycles on this godforsaken trade station had been frustrating indeed. Certainly, he hadn't really expected anything from the new propulsion system he'd designed, beyond the utility it might provide for the human fleet. But in light of the interest it had generated, he'd been looking forward to profiting from the patents. And now that plan was dead in the water, with nothing to show for it beyond a pat on the back from Fleet Admiral Harrington. So yes, he was frustrated, significantly more than he'd been when he'd chosen to sleep with a Centaurian diplomat right under his captain's nose. That had been an equally terrible idea for all sorts of reasons, but that hadn't stopped him then, and it wasn't going to stop him now. "Don't tell me you've never had this fantasy," he murmured into her ear, "bringing some human officer into your quarters for some discipline." The heated groan he got in response was all the confirmation he needed. The Arcturian whiskey they'd been drinking earlier sat on the desk behind them, now lukewarm, but with each glass still half full. A testament to how fast things had developed once he'd made his move. Though calling it a move was something of an exaggeration. A little tugging at his uniform, a few heated looks, the odd flirtatious comment, and the rest was history. Lieutenant Commander Nylara moved to speak again, before he silenced her with a kiss. She didn't fight. To the contrary, beyond a slight widening of her luminous eyes, there was barely a moment before her tongue was tangling with his. As it did, her own hands came up to grasp at his uniform, hands sliding beneath the hem to trail over the hard ridges of his abdomen. Another groan issued forth from the alien, as he was sure she fulfilled some secret desire of hers as her fingers probed at his bare skin, their cool touch contrasting with the heat of his body. For his own part, he was certainly enjoying the fulfillment of his own clandestine desires as the woman's uniform finally came open, and it was glorious. A long expanse of smooth violet skin, punctuated by the womanly curves of two delectable mounds. Certainly, Nylara was hardly the most endowed woman he'd ever seen, given that she was as svelte as most Proxians tended to be, but that did nothing to curtail Mark's excitement. Nor did the rather strictly utilitarian gray undershirt that encased the objects of his affection, though it was hard not to notice the two rather prominent bumps that had tinted the front of said item. "Someone's excited," he teased, enjoying the shudder of both embarrassment and pleasure that washed across the alien's features as he gave each sensitive peak a gentle caress. Though the move did seem to allow some degree of awareness to reassert itself in the lieutenant commander's mind, her explorations of his own chest pausing, right up until her nails dug in, sending a tingle through him as the sensation bordered somewhere between pain and pleasure. "A little," Nylara smirked, her eyes glinting dangerously as a wide grin slipped across her features. "It's not every day a woman like me finds out one of her officers is a total rogue. It's enough to make me wonder if I should be worried for the discipline of your engineering team." Both surprised and a little excited by the sudden turnabout, Mark found his back pressed against the desk as the Proxian scooted her chair forward, his position on her lap now made slightly precarious as his legs twisted awkwardly. Because he'd made sure to keep at least one leg on the ground to support his weight, unlike a Tauran, Nylara may have been near his own height but nowhere near his frame. He hadn't wanted to crush her. Unfortunately, that meant he was now completely off balance as the alien's fingers twisted his nipples with sadistic glee as she leaned down to lay a small love bite on his exposed shoulder, just far enough to be out of sight while he was in uniform. So long as he didn't pull at his collar too much. "I'd thought the rumors were overblown and that you were a good boy," she murmured into his ear, nibbling at the earlobe. "Now I can't help but wonder if you and those engineers were just better at hiding it." "Hardly," he grunted as a hand came down to cup the painfully hard bulge in his pants, the powerful palm sliding over the head possessively. They're all good officers, but that's all they are. Some part of him was torn between just letting the woman dictate the pace in trying to turn the tide. It didn't help that every twitch of the Proxian's palm sent lightning up his spine. It also served as a firm reminder that it had been a hot minute since he'd enjoyed any kind of intimacy, self-inflicted or otherwise. He spent most of his day with his team, and he was usually asleep the moment his head hit the pillow in the evening. A routine that left precious little time for a little self-pleasure. Still, decisions on who was about to be top or bottom in this little detente would have to wait as he stared into Nilara's dangerously hungry eyes. "I prefer women, not girls." A brief hint of surprise flashed across the older woman's face before her smile managed to grow even wider. "A cougar chaser, probably for the best. Those little engineers wouldn't know what to do with a rogue like you." "And you do?" he taunted. He felt the belt of his pants coming undone under the woman's nimble fingers, which was an impressive feat of dexterity, given that her other hand was undoing the buttons of his shirt. Soon enough, both gave way, and the woman slid back to admire her handiwork. Now stood up, with his thighs pressed against the desk. Mark felt no shame as he stood there in little more than an open shirt, his pants around his ankles, while his manhood strained against his boxers. Positively red with arousal and hard as Durasteel, the thing throbbed in the open air, throbbing that only increased as he admired the alien goddess across from him, her gorgeous violet complexion practically glistening under the nearby starlight. Sleek but well-muscled, Mark couldn't help but think of a panther as he took in her taut thighs and tight stomach. Graceful, that was the only word to describe her. Svelte, but with undeniably feminine curves. God, he wanted her. And looking at the gleam in her eyes as she stared across at him, he knew the feeling was mutual. Not commander and lieutenant commander, merely a male and a female. Or at least that was what he thought as his hands moved to the band of his boxers. Stop. If the words were a surprise to him, they seemed even more so to the woman who spoke them. But with the words said, the moment seemed to be broken. The spell of lust shattered. "We can't," Nilara said, her hands moving to pull the open sides of her uniform closed. "We can't," she seemed almost trying to convince herself. Mark couldn't help the disappointment. Military discipline or not, he was still human. If he wasn't in this state of affairs, wouldn't have to pass. "Are you sure?" he asked tentatively. He wouldn't push. That would be his only prompt. Desire or not, he had pride enough to limit himself to that much. "Stars, no." Nilara's laugh was practically filled with self-recrimination, her eyes roaming across him once more. "But that doesn't mean I'm not right." Deliberately looking to the side, she continued, "Put your clothes back on, Commander." Sighing internally, Mark couldn't help but smile, even as he reached for his pants. "You know, being all dutiful is only making you more attractive, not less." "Don't," Nilara laughed humorlessly again. "My self-control is holding on by a thread here. Honestly, an officer jumping me in my own quarters. It's practically out of some trashy holovid. Someone else might have taken that for an invitation, but Mark liked to think he was better than that. Oh, he wouldn't give up. He wasn't that much better because he hadn't been lying. The woman across from him seemed even hotter than ever before, but his next attempt to bed the delicious Proxian wouldn't be here. Not now. She deserved that much. "Well, I applaud your self-control," he said as he buttoned his shirt back up, and the love bite on his neck now covered. "Even as some part of me laments it." "You and me both," Nilara said as she finished making herself presentable again, moments before she sank into her chair. Daring to glance up, it wasn't hard to see both the disappointment, regret, and relief in her eyes as she saw that he was, once more, decent. At least mostly. His lower half seemed quite unwilling to admit that the moment had passed and was now uncomfortably pressed against his pants. Something that wasn't helped by Nilara subconsciously wetting her lips when she noticed, prior to hastily glancing away. Gods, the things I would do to her, he thought. Ignorant of his thoughts, she took a breath, her tone becoming serious. "I think it best for both of us that we pretend this little incident didn't happen." Recognizing that the woman had slipped back into her role as superior officer, Mark made the executive decision of moving back around her desk to right his own chair, before sitting down and nodding. Yes, ma'am. The easy response seemed to surprise the Proxian. Truly? She clearly hadn't expected him to take his rejection well. Likely, she'd been getting ready for a very uncomfortable conversation. He shrugged. As I recall, I initiated this. It'd hardly be fair of me to get into a tiff because you rightfully turned me down. The lieutenant commander actually stared at him for a few seconds after that. That's a surprisingly mature approach, Commander. She coughed. One that is appreciated, especially as I should have shut the whole thing down the moment it started. Mark resisted the urge to smirk. Yes, she should have. But to be fair to her, how many single officers would have turned down a no-obligation encounter with an attractive colleague, especially if said colleague initiated by literally throwing themselves at said officer? Some certainly. Not all, though. Not even most, probably, he thought. Sure, he did it daily with his own engineering team, or mostly just Lieutenant Pratt. But there were a number of exceptional factors at play there, not the least of which being that in this corner of the galaxy, he as a man had all the opportunities he wanted for companionship, if he so desired. He liked to think the professional factor would mean his decision to stay away from anything romantic with said officers would remain the case if he had fewer opportunities for release. But as this most recent liaison proved, he was anything but made of iron where women were concerned. That the woman across from him had accomplished the same feat in those circumstances was worthy of respect, even if it took her a minute or two to reach that decision. We're all only mortal, ma'am. He shrugged. And as I said, I definitely initiated it. Something close to irritation flashed across the woman's features now at his blasé attitude. Yes, you won't be reprimanded for this particular incident, as I'm also partially to blame. To that end, once you leave this room, we shall forget all about this. I will be the lieutenant commander once more, and you the commander. She eyed him. Because you can rest assured that if the choice comes down to resigning my position or allowing an officer to buck discipline because of a shared incident, I shall not hesitate to take the former path. At her words, Mark allowed all levity to leave his face as he looked at her with the utmost seriousness. It won't come to that, ma'am. I can separate work from play. As you said, beyond those doors, you shall be the lieutenant commander and I the commander. Nilara nodded, though she paused a little at his word choice before shaking her head. Very well. You may leave now, Commander. If you hurry, you should make it back to your quarters before the night cycle begins. Standing up at her dismissal, Mark was thankful for the fact that his little man had finally admitted defeat, as the lack of a bulge in his pants made things significantly more comfortable as he made for the door, though he did pause at the threshold. Ma'am, the Proxian glanced up from the data pad she'd just been about to pull out, though there was no missing the stiffness of her movements, nor the fact that she flushed slightly as she looked at him. Yes, Commander? Her words were cautious, which only made Mark smirk internally as he kept his features entirely professional. With that said, if we are to beat no more than Lieutenant Commander and Commander beyond the walls of your quarters, does that mean we might be more within them? Allowing himself one final smirk at the alien's gobsmacked and slightly flushed, and not with anger if he didn't miss his Mark shredded expression, he stepped out of her quarters and into the corridor. That was a bad idea, he thought as he made his way through the halls. Yet he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Oh, he'd certainly failed in his first attempt to bed his delightful superior officer, but their tour of duty was far from over. As he turned the corner, a flash of movement caught his eye. In his distracted state, he collided with someone. Hard. They both stumbled, and as he reached out to steady the other person, his hand brushed against bare skin, exposed violet skin. I'm so sorry, I wasn't... His words died in his throat as he realized it was Nilara, her uniform partially open at the back, where she'd been adjusting something. And there it was, a geometric pattern etched into her skin, unlike anything he'd ever seen. A scar, clearly, but with perfect lines and angles that couldn't possibly be natural. Her eyes widened in horror as she realized what he'd seen. In an instant, she pulled her uniform closed, her face a mask of panic. Please, she whispered, forget what you saw. But how could he? That pattern wasn't just any scar. It was something else entirely. Something she'd been hiding. Something that would change everything between them. Mark couldn't sleep. The geometric pattern on Nalaura's back haunted him, perfect angles and symmetrical lines that couldn't possibly be natural. He'd seen battle scars, ritual markings, and even decorative scarification from a dozen different species, but nothing like this. He sat up in his quarters, the station's artificial night cycle casting everything in dim blue light. His terminal glowed as he scrolled through the limited information on Proxian physiology available in the human database. Computer, any information on Proxian cultural markings or scarification rituals? Limited data available, the synthetic voice responded. Proxian cultural practices are largely undocumented due to restricted access granted to non-Proxians. Of course, the Proxians had only joined the Galactic Alliance 15 years ago, and they remained one of the most secretive member species. Their technological contributions had been invaluable, particularly in propulsion systems. Ironically, the very field Mark specialized in. He rubbed his eyes and checked the time. 0300 hours. He had a duty shift in 5 hours, but sleep seemed impossible now. The look of absolute terror in Nalaura's eyes kept replaying in his mind. Computer, access personnel file, Lieutenant Commander Nalara, accessing, warning, full access to personnel files requires alpha clearance. Display publicly available information only. The screen filled with Nalara's service record, impressive but suspiciously vague. Graduated top of her class at the Proxian Science Academy. Served aboard 3 vessels before being assigned to this station. Commendations for exceptional service without specific details. Nothing about her personal life or background. A knock at his door startled him. Computer, who's at the door? Lieutenant Commander Nalara. His heart raced. He quickly closed the files and straightened his t-shirt. Enter. The door slid open to reveal Nalara, still in uniform despite the late hour. Her lavender hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face. Her luminous eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his mouth go dry. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside and letting the door close behind her. "I was just thinking the same thing." She paced his quarters, her movements tense and controlled. "You saw something you shouldn't have." "I didn't mean to," he said, rising from his chair, "but I can't unsee it either." "You could try," she suggested, her voice tight. "Is that what you want? For me to pretend I didn't see anything?" He stepped closer. "Because the look on your face told me this isn't just about privacy. You were terrified, Nylara." She flinched at his use of her name without rank. "You don't understand what's at stake? Then help me understand?" He gestured to the small sitting area. "Please." After a moment's hesitation, she sat on the edge of the couch, her posture rigid. Mark took the chair opposite her, giving her space. "What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room," she said. "If it does, both our lives are forfeit." The gravity in her voice sent a chill down his spine. "I understand." "No, you don't," she snapped, and then closed her eyes, composing herself. "The mark you saw is called a Vexus pattern. It identifies me as—" She paused, searching for words. "In your terms, a genetically modified individual." Mark's brow furrowed. "Genetic modification is common enough. Why the secrecy?" "Not like this." Her fingers twisted together in her lap. "I was part of a military program. The Proxian High Command created soldiers with enhanced abilities, strength, speed, intelligence, endurance. The program was deemed too dangerous and officially terminated 20 years ago." "Officially?" It continued underground. "I was 12 when they took me." Her voice remained steady, but her eyes held shadows. "The pattern you saw is both a marker and a control mechanism. It's integrated with my nervous system." Mark felt sick. "Control mechanism? You mean it can cause extreme pain or paralysis if activated by the right frequency?" She looked away. "Or death." "Jesus," he whispered. "And the Proxian government did this to children?" "A faction within our military. When the Alliance discovered hints of the program 5 years ago, the Proxian government officially condemned it and executed the known leaders." Her mouth twisted. "But they didn't free us. We're considered state secrets, too dangerous to be acknowledged. If I'm discovered, I'll be eliminated to preserve diplomatic relations." The implication staggered him. "How many of you are there?" I don't know anymore. We were separated after training. Some died during the procedures, others during missions. Her voice grew distant. I escaped during a diplomatic mission 3 years ago and altered my records. I've been hiding in plain sight ever since. Mark leaned forward. Why are you telling me this? You could have denied everything. Her eyes met his, vulnerability mixing with determination. Because I've been watching you, Mark. You're a good man. And because... She hesitated. I'm tired of running, tired of being alone with this. The admission hung in the air between them. Mark felt the weight of her trust and the danger it represented. The officials arriving tomorrow, he said, realization dawning. They're not just here for the trade negotiations, are they? She shook her head. There have been rumors of escaped assets in this sector. I don't know if they're looking specifically for me, but they'll have scanners that can detect the Vexus pattern. Then we need to get you off the station. There's nowhere to go. Proxy and agents have access throughout Alliance space. Mark stood, mind racing. There has to be a way to remove or disable the pattern. Don't you think I've tried? Bitterness edged her voice. It's integrated with my spinal column. Attempting removal would kill me. He paced, and the engineer in him refusing to accept an unsolvable problem. What about masking it? Blocking the frequency? A flicker of hope crossed her face. Theoretically possible, but I'd need specialized equipment. Which I might be able to get, he said, thinking of his contacts in R&D. But we'd need time. She stood, suddenly close enough that he could smell the faint, exotic scent of her skin. Time is the one thing I don't have. The proximity between them reignited the tension from earlier. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, the attraction between them felt stronger than ever. Her revelation had created an intimacy more profound than physical desire. I won't let them take you, he said, his voice low and fierce. Her hand reached up to touch his face, her cool fingers tracing his jawline. Why would you risk everything for someone you barely know? Because what they did to you was wrong. His hand covered hers. And because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the day we met. The admission surprised them both. Her eyes widened, then softened. Even before you saw my back? Long before that, he confirmed, a small smile breaking through the tension. Though I have to say, mysterious alien super soldier does make you even more intriguing. A startled laugh escaped her. You're impossible. I prefer determined. His thumb traced circles on her palm. We'll figure this out, Nilara. Together. The words seemed to affect her deeply. She stepped closer, the last barriers between them crumbling. Together, she repeated, like she was testing an unfamiliar concept. I've never had that before. When their lips met this time, it wasn't the heated rush of their earlier encounter. It was slower, deeper, a promise. Her arms wound around his neck as his encircled her waist, drawing her against him. The station's comm system chimed, shattering the moment. Attention all senior officers. Proxy and diplomatic vessel Stellar Accord has arrived ahead of schedule. Command staff report to docking bay 3:30 minutes to receive the delegation. They broke apart, reality crashing back. They're early, she whispered, fear returning to her eyes. Mark's mind shifted to tactical mode. We have half an hour. That's enough time to get you somewhere safe while I assess the situation. Where? They'll scan the entire station, he thought quickly. The maintenance tunnels in Section 12. The lead shielding blocks most scans. It was why we can't use standard comms down there. Hope and doubt warred on her face. And then what? Then I find out exactly what they're looking for, he said, already moving to his storage unit for an extra communicator. And we figure out our next move. As they prepared to separate, Nilara caught his arm. Mark, thank you. He pulled her close for one more brief, fierce kiss. Stay safe. I'll find you when I can. As she slipped out of his quarters, Mark knew his life had irrevocably changed. Whatever happened next, there was no going back to the way things were. The hunt had begun. Mark straightened his dress uniform, the stiff collar uncomfortable against his neck as he joined the other senior officers in the reception line. The docking bay had been hastily transformed into a welcoming area, with station flags alongside Proxian banners in deep indigo and silver. Station Commander Harrington nodded approvingly as Mark took his position. Commander Shannon, cutting it close. Sorry, sir, last-minute preparations. Not entirely a lie, he'd spent the last 20 minutes rigging a modified scanner into his uniform cuff, calibrated to detect the specific frequencies Nalara had described. If the Proxians had technology to activate the Vexus pattern, he needed to identify it. The airlock cycled open, and the Proxian delegation emerged. 3 males and 2 females, all with the characteristic violet skin and light hair of their species, though their features seemed more angular than Nilara's. They wore formal attire, flowing robes in deep blues with intricate silver geometric patterns that reminded Mark uncomfortably of the scar on Nilara's back. The lead diplomat, Ambassador Torin, stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Commander Harrington, the Proxian hegemony extends its gratitude for your accommodation of our early arrival." "The pleasure is ours, Ambassador. May I introduce my senior staff?" As introductions proceeded down the line, Mark studied the delegation. Behind the ambassador stood a stern-faced male whose robes, while diplomatic in style, couldn't disguise his military bearing. His eyes constantly scanned the room, security assessment. The 2 females appeared to be aides, but one carried what looked like a data tablet that Mark's scanner immediately flagged. When his turn came, Mark bowed slightly. "Commander Mark Shannon, Chief Engineer." Ambassador Torin's eyes lit with interest. "Ah, the propulsion specialist. Your work has been noted by our science ministry." "You honor me, Ambassador." The military officer stepped forward. "Commander Shannon, I am Security Consul Valen. I understand your engineering section extends throughout the station." "It does. We maintain the station's systems from central hubs in each sector." "Fascinating. Perhaps you might provide a tour later. I have a particular interest in human engineering approaches." Mark smiled pleasantly while his mind raced. "Of course, though I should warn you, it's not as glamorous as diplomatic work." The female with the tablet stepped closer, and his scanner registered a stronger signal. "I would be interested as well. I'm Scientific Attaché Mira." "The more the merrier," Mark replied, maintaining his easy demeanor despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. The device she carried was definitely emitting frequencies in the range Nilara had described. Commander Harrington led the delegation toward the station's conference room, leaving Mark momentarily alone. He tapped his communicator twice, the signal he'd arranged with Nilara to indicate danger. The reception that followed was excruciating. Mark circulated through the room, engaging in polite conversation, while keeping the Proxian delegation in his peripheral vision. Scientific Attaché Mira never strayed far from her tablet, and twice he caught her discreetly scanning the room. He managed to position himself near enough to overhear a conversation between Valen and the ambassador. "No indications yet," Valen was saying quietly, "but the station's design provides numerous hiding places." "We have limited time," Torin replied. "The Alliance representatives arrive in 3 days. This matter must be resolved before then. The tracker is functioning. If the asset is aboard, we will find it." Asset, not her, it. The casual dehumanization made Mark's blood boil. He approached with 2 glasses of the Arcturian whiskey being served. "Ambassador, Consul, may I offer you a drink? It's from my personal reserve." Torin accepted with a diplomatic smile. "Most kind, Commander." Valen declined with a curt gesture. "I prefer clarity of mind." "A wise policy," Mark agreed, though sometimes a different perspective can reveal solutions to complex problems. "An interesting philosophy," when Torin said, "Is that the human approach to engineering challenges as well?" "Absolutely. We have a saying, when conventional methods fail, try the unconventional." "Your species' adaptability is remarkable," the ambassador observed. "It's why the Alliance values human ingenuity, despite your relatively recent arrival on the galactic stage." Mark inclined his head. "We're still learning, but we bring fresh eyes to old problems." "Indeed." Torin's gaze sharpened. "I understand you work closely with Lieutenant Commander Nalara. I don't see her this evening." The question seemed casual, but Mark felt the trap. "She's overseeing critical maintenance. The station's deep core systems require constant attention." "A pity. I was hoping to meet all senior staff." "I'm sure she'll be available tomorrow," Mark lied smoothly. "She mentioned looking forward to the cultural exchange portion of your visit." Valen's eyes narrowed slightly. "The Lieutenant Commander is Proxian, is she not?" Curious that she would need cultural exchange with her own people. She's been stationed here for some time, Mark replied, and she's mentioned that proxy and customs evolve rapidly. She's eager to reconnect with current trends. Before Valen could press further, Commander Harrington called for attention to formally welcome the delegation. Mark used the opportunity to slip away, making a show of checking his communicator as if receiving a message. He nodded apologetically to his superior and exited the reception. Once in the corridor, he moved quickly toward the maintenance tunnels, checking repeatedly to ensure he wasn't followed. The tunnels were dimly lit and humming with the station's mechanical heartbeat. He navigated the maze-like passages until he reached the junction they'd agreed upon. "Nylara?" he called softly. She emerged from the shadows, tension evident in every line of her body. "What did you learn?" "They're definitely hunting for assets. The female attaché has some kind of tracking device." He showed her the scanner readings. "It's emitting frequencies that match what you described." Nylara paled. "A Vexus activator. They can use it to incapacitate me, or worse. They don't know you're here yet, but they're suspicious about your absence." He took her hands, which were cold to the touch. "We need to neutralize that device." "How?" "We can't just steal it." "No, but I might be able to disrupt it." His mind was already calculating possibilities. "If I can get close enough to analyze its exact frequency pattern, I could create a countermeasure." She shook her head. "Too dangerous. They'll be watching you now. They've requested an engineering tour tomorrow. It's the perfect opportunity. And if they detect your scanner, or worse, if they activate a wide-range pulse while searching, Mark, it would paralyze me instantly." He squeezed her hands. "Then we need to get you further away. The station's outer ring has independent systems, and better yet, it's scheduled for maintenance tomorrow. No one will question sealed sections." Relief flickered across her features, quickly replaced by determination. "I can make it there through the external access tubes. I'll bring supplies tonight." He checked the time. "I need to get back before they notice I'm gone too long." She caught his arm as he turned to leave. "Mark, why are you doing this? You're risking everything." The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken implications. In the dim light, her violet skin seemed to glow, her eyes luminous with vulnerability that cut straight to his core. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. Then with a half smile, "And because I've never been good at walking away from a beautiful woman in distress." Her expression softened and she stepped closer. "Is that all I am to you? A damsel in need of rescue? You know it's not." His voice dropped lower as the space between them disappeared. "You're brilliant, fierce, and frankly terrifying in all the best ways." A smile tugged at her lips. "Terrifying?" "Absolutely." His hands found her waist. "I haven't been able to think straight since I met you." "That sounds like a tactical disadvantage, Commander." "Worth it," he murmured just before their lips met. The kiss deepened quickly, months of tension and the adrenaline of danger fueling a hunger neither could deny. Her body pressed against his, cool against his human warmth, creating an intoxicating contrast. His hands traced the curve of her spine, carefully avoiding the area where he knew the scar lay. She broke the kiss, breathing hard. "This is madness." "Probably," he agreed, resting his forehead against hers. "But I'm beginning to think madness is underrated." A distant clang echoed through the tunnels and they sprang apart, instantly alert. "Go," she whispered. "I'll be fine." He nodded reluctantly. "Outer ring, section 47. I'll come as soon as I can." As he made his way back toward the reception, Mark knew he was crossing a line from which there would be no return. For a woman he barely knew, he was risking his career, possibly his life. And somehow, it felt like the most natural decision he'd ever made. "And this is our primary power distribution hub," Mark explained, leading the proxy and officials through the engineering section. "We've modified the standard Alliance design to accommodate the station's unique position within the planet's crust." Scientific attaché Mira ran her fingers along a control panel, the tablet device still clutched in her other hand. "Fascinating adaptation. The thermal regulation must be challenging." "That's putting it mildly," Mark replied with a practiced smile. "We essentially float in a sea of magma. Makes for excellent power generation, but keeps my engineers on their toes. In the security console, Volin had remained mostly silent throughout the tour, his eyes constantly scanning each room. Now he stepped forward. These maintenance tunnels, they connect to all sections of the station? Most of them. Some areas are compartmentalized for safety. Mark pointed to a schematic on the wall. The outer ring, for instance, has independent systems in case of emergency. I see. Bolin exchanged a glance with Mira. And is that where maintenance is currently being performed? The casual question sent warning signals through Mark's mind. Yes, routine calibration of the thermal shields should be completed by tomorrow. Mira's tablet emitted a soft chime, and she quickly silenced it. Commander Shannon, your station design is truly remarkable. Might I examine the environmental control systems more closely? I have a particular interest in atmospheric recycling. Of course. Mark led them toward the environmental section, his mind racing. The chime from her tablet couldn't be coincidence. Had they detected something? Was Nylara safe? As they walked, his communicator vibrated against his wrist, Commander Harrington requesting his immediate presence. Perfect timing. I apologize, he said, displaying the message. It seems my commanding officer needs me. My deputy, Lieutenant Park, can continue your tour. Valen's eyes narrowed. Most unfortunate. I had several more questions for you specifically. I'm sure Lieutenant Park is equally qualified to answer them, if you'll excuse me. Mark nodded to Park, who had appeared at his signal, then strode away before they could object further. Instead of heading to Harrington's office, however, he took a circuitous route to a maintenance access point, slipping inside once he confirmed no one was watching. The narrow tunnels would take him to the outer ring faster than the main corridors. His communicator buzzed again, this time with a message from Nylara. They're scanning. Move now. Cursing under his breath, Mark quickened his pace through the dimly lit passages. The Proxians must have calibrated their device to detect the Vexus pattern throughout the station. He needed to reach Nylara before they did. He was halfway to Section 47 when he heard voices ahead, maintenance crew. Ducking into a side passage, he found himself in a narrow access shaft barely wide enough for his shoulders. He pressed himself against the wall, hoping they would pass quickly. Complete the outer ring calibration by 1800, one of the technicians was saying. Commander's orders. That's 2 hours ahead of schedule, another complained. What's the rush? Don't know, don't care. Just following orders. Their voices faded as they moved away, but Mark remained frozen. Orders to finish early? He hadn't issued any such directive, which meant… Harrington. The commander must be suspicious. He tapped his communicator, sending Nylara a warning to move deeper into the outer ring. Then he continued forward, moving as quickly and silently as possible through the maintenance tunnels. He was nearly there when a hand grabbed his arm, pulling him into a side passage. He spun, ready to fight, only to find himself face to face with Nylara. What are you doing here? He hissed. You're supposed to be in Section 47. They're scanning that section now, she whispered back. I had to move. Her face was tense with fear, but there was something else in her eyes, a fierce determination that made his heart race. Even in danger, she was magnificent. We need to keep moving, he said. They've accelerated the maintenance schedule. We don't have much time. A distant clang echoed through the tunnels, followed by voices. Nylara's eyes widened. They're coming this way. Mark looked around frantically. The passage they were in was a dead end, with only a narrow access shaft leading upward. Up there, it's our only chance. The shaft was barely large enough for one person, let alone two. Mark boosted Nylara up first, then squeezed in after her. They climbed several meters until they reached a small maintenance platform, little more than a ledge with barely enough room for both of them. They pressed against each other in the darkness, hardly daring to breathe as footsteps approached below. The signal was strongest here, came Mira's voice. It's definitely one of ours. Spread out, Valen ordered. Check every passage. It can't have gone far. Again, that dehumanizing term. Mark felt Nylara tense against him, her breathing shallow. They'll find us, she whispered, so quietly he could barely hear her. No, they won't. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. I won't let them. They remained motionless as the search continued below. Nylara's body trembled slightly against his. Whether from fear or the strain of holding us still, he couldn't tell. Her face was buried against his chest, and he could feel her heart racing. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, the voices began to recede. "The signal's fading," Mira said, frustration evident in her tone. "It must be moving through the outer sections." "Seal off all access points," Valen commanded. "We'll conduct a systematic sweep." Their footsteps faded, leaving Mark and Nylara alone in the darkness. "They're gone," he whispered, relaxing slightly. For now, Nylara didn't move immediately, her body still pressed against his. When she finally looked up, her face was inches from his, her eyes luminous in the dim emergency lighting. "Thank you," she said softly. "Most of my people would have turned me in by now." "I'm not most people," his hand moved to cup her face. "And you're worth protecting." Something shifted in her expression, vulnerability giving way to a different kind of tension. In the cramped space, every breath brought them closer together. "Mark," she whispered, his name like a question on her lips. He answered by closing the distance between them, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly blazed into something more urgent. Her arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer as her body arched against his. The danger surrounding them seemed to intensify every sensation. His hands traced the curves of her body, committing each contour to memory as her cool fingers slipped beneath his uniform, exploring the heat of his skin. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "This is probably the worst possible timing," he said with a rueful smile. "Or the best," she countered, her eyes holding his. "We might not get another chance." The implication hung between them, heavy with possibility and fear. "Don't talk like that," he said firmly. "We're going to get through this." Before she could respond, his communicator vibrated. Commander Harrington again, this time with a direct order to report immediately. "I have to go," he said reluctantly. "If I don't show up, it'll only make things worse." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "What's our plan?" he thought quickly. "The Alliance representatives arrive tomorrow. If we can hold out until then, the Proxians won't risk an incident. They'll just wait until the Alliance delegates leave. Not if we expose them first." An idea was forming in his mind. "The Alliance has strict laws against genetic modification for military purposes. If we can prove what the Proxians did to you..." "With what evidence?" "My word against theirs." She shook her head. "I'm a fugitive, Mark. No one will believe me. They'll believe data." He tapped his scanner. "I've been analyzing the frequencies from Mira's device. If I can access the station's main computer, I might be able to decrypt what they're doing." Hope flickered in her eyes. "That could work, but you need to be careful. If Harrington is suspicious, I'll handle Harrington." He kissed her again, quickly but fiercely. "Stay hidden. I'll come back as soon as I can." As he prepared to leave, she caught his hand. "Mark, if something happens to me..." "It won't," he interrupted. "But if it does," she insisted, "I want you to know that meeting you, it was worth everything. You made me feel human again." The simple statement hit him like a physical blow. He pulled her close one more time, his forehead resting against hers. "You are human," he whispered, "more human than anyone I've ever known." When they separated, something had changed between them, a connection deeper than physical attraction or shared danger. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Mark made his way to Commander Harrington's office, his mind working through contingencies. The commander was waiting, his expression grave. "Commander Shannon," Harrington said as the door closed behind him. "I think it's time we had a frank discussion about Lieutenant Commander Nylara." "I know what she is," Commander Harrington said, his voice low and steady as he leaned across his desk. "And I know what you've been doing, Commander Shannon." Mark maintained his composure despite the hammering of his heart. "Sir, I can explain..." "Save it." Harrington raised a hand, then unexpectedly tapped a control on his desk. A privacy field hummed to life around the office. 20 years ago, my daughter joined a joint human Proxian research initiative. 6 months later, I received notification of her death in a laboratory accident. Mark remained silent, uncertain where this was heading. "It took me 5 years to discover the truth," Harrington continued, his eyes hardening. "She wasn't dead. She'd been selected for genetic modification experiments. By the time I found her, she was..." He paused, composing himself. "She wasn't my daughter anymore, not really." Understanding dawned on Mark. "Sir, I couldn't save her," Harrington said flatly, "but I can help you save Nalara." Relief flooded through Mark, quickly followed by suspicion. "Why would you help us?" "Because I've spent 15 years working my way into a position where I could do something about these programs." Harrington activated his terminal, displaying a series of classified files. "The Alliance suspects, but they've never had proof. Until now." The screen showed detailed schematics of Mira's device. "It's not just a tracker," Harrington explained. "It's a control mechanism and the key to deactivating the Vexus pattern permanently." Mark leaned forward, studying the design. "You've been monitoring their communications since the moment they requested permission to dock early." Harrington nodded. "I needed to know if they were here for her. When you started acting suspiciously, I put it together." "So what's your plan?" "The Alliance delegation arrives in 12 hours. Ambassador Chester owes me a favor." Harrington's mouth curved in a grim smile. "But we need that device. With it, we can not only free Nalara, but provide the Alliance with irrefutable evidence of the Proxian military's illegal activities." Mark's mind raced through possibilities. "They'll guard it closely." "Which is why we need a distraction." Harrington pulled up the station schematics. "And why Nalara needs to turn herself in." "Absolutely not," Mark snapped. "Hear me out, Commander. It's her only chance." Nalara paced the narrow confines of the maintenance shaft, anxiety gnawing at her. Mark had been gone too long. Had he been captured? Exposed? The uncertainty was worse than any pain the Vexus pattern had ever inflicted. Her communicator vibrated with an incoming message. "Maintenance access 17B now." No signature, but she recognized Mark's code. Moving silently through the tunnels, she reached the access point and found not only Mark waiting, but Commander Harrington as well. She froze, ready to flee, but Mark's reassuring nod made her hesitate. "Lieutenant Commander," Harrington said formally, "I believe we have a mutual enemy." The next few minutes were a blur as they outlined the plan. With each detail, her disbelief grew. "You want me to surrender?" she finally asked. "After everything I've done to stay free?" "It's a calculated risk," Harrington admitted. "But with the Alliance representatives arriving and the evidence we'll gather, the Proxians won't dare harm you." "You don't know them like I do," she countered. "They'll activate the pattern and have me off station before anyone can intervene." "Not if we disable it first." Mark showed her the schematics he'd been studying. "Mira's device is the key. If I can access it long enough to reverse the signal." "It could kill me," she said bluntly. "It could free you," he responded, his eyes holding hers, "permanently." The possibility, freedom from the constant fear, from the pattern that marked her as property, was almost too much to hope for. "And if it doesn't work?" "Then I'll still be there," Mark promised. "We'll find another way." She looked between the two men, one she barely knew, offering redemption for his own past failures. The other she'd known for months but only truly met days ago, offering everything. "When?" she asked finally. "Now," Harrington said. "The Proxians are gathered in the conference room, reviewing their search data. It's our best opportunity to access Mira's quarters." Nalara took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Then let's do it." The plan unfolded with military precision, while Harrington created a diversion by summoning Valen to discuss security concerns. Mark and Nalara slipped into Mira's quarters. The device sat on a charging station, unguarded. "Hurry," Nalara whispered, keeping watch at the door. Mark worked quickly, connecting his scanner to the device. "Almost there." "Got it?" He downloaded the frequency patterns, then made a crucial modification to the device itself. "Will it work?" she asked as they retreated to the predetermined position. "It has to," he replied, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. The next phase was the most dangerous. Nalara would appear to surrender, allowing herself to be taken to the conference room where the Proxian delegation waited. Mark and Harrington would confront them with Alliance representatives who had secretly arrived ahead of schedule, summoned by Harrington's urgent message. As they prepared to separate, Mark pulled her into an alcove, his hands framing her face. "If this goes wrong," he began. She silenced him with a kiss, pouring everything she couldn't say into it. When they broke apart, she smiled. "It won't. You humans are surprisingly resourceful." "One of our better qualities," he agreed, returning her smile despite the tension. "I've noticed others, she said, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Your warmth, your stubbornness, your capacity for compassion, even toward those who aren't your kind. Is that how you see yourself? As not my kind? Her expression softened. Not anymore. With one final embrace, they separated, each moving to their assigned positions. The confrontation in the conference room was everything they had anticipated. Valen's shock at seeing Nylara voluntarily appear quickly turned to smug satisfaction. Asset N7, he said coldly. You've led us on quite a chase. I'm tired of running, she replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Mira stepped forward with the modified device. Wise decision, though ultimately futile. The moment she activated it, Nylara braced for pain, but instead of agony, she felt a strange tingling along her spine, followed by a sensation like chains breaking. The Vexus pattern, active in her nervous system for 15 years, went dormant. She straightened, meeting Valen's confused gaze with newfound strength. It's over. The door slid open, revealing Commander Harrington with Alliance Ambassador Chester and 2 security officers. Security Consul Valen, Ambassador Chester said formally. You are hereby detained pending investigation into violations of Alliance Treaty Section 47, prohibiting non-consensual genetic modification for military purposes. Valen's face contorted with rage. This is a Proxian internal matter. You have no jurisdiction. We have evidence, Ms. Harrington interrupted, nodding to Mark, who stepped forward with the data they'd gathered. And witnesses. What followed was diplomatic chaos, protests, denials, threats. Through it all, Nylara stood tall, her testimony damning as she recounted her experiences in the program. The evidence from Mira's device provided irrefutable proof of the Proxion's military's continued illegal operations. By the time the Alliance security team escorted the Proxian delegation to holding cells, Nylara felt lightheaded with disbelief. Was it truly over? After years of running, of hiding who she was? Lieutenant Commander, Ambassador Chester addressed her formally, the Alliance offers its profound apologies for what was done to you. We will ensure you receive full protection and citizenship rights. Thank you, Ambassador, she replied, still processing the implications. Freedom. Real freedom. As the officials filed out, leaving her alone with Mark, the reality began to sink in. It worked, she whispered, her hand moving to her back where the pattern lay dormant. I can feel the difference. Harrington's scientist will remove it completely, Mark said, taking her hands in his. It's just dead circuitry now. She looked up at him, seeing the future open before her for the first time. What happens now? That depends, he said, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. The Alliance will offer you asylum, protection, probably a position utilizing your skills. And us, she asked, the question that had been hovering between them finally spoken aloud. His smile was slow and certain. That's entirely up to you, but I was thinking we could start with dinner. In actual quarters, not a maintenance shaft. She laughed, the sound strange to her own ears after so much tension. I'd like that. 6 months later, Nylara stood on the observation deck of the Alliance flagship Intrepid, watching stars streak by at warp. Her new uniform felt strange still. Science Division blue instead of the command gold she'd worn as part of her cover. The door hissed open behind her, and familiar arms wrapped around her waist. Thinking deep thoughts? Mark asked, his chin resting on her shoulder. Just appreciating the view, she replied, leaning back against him. And the company. His hands moved to her abdomen, which had just begun to show the slightest curve. How are you feeling? Better. The morning sickness is finally subsiding. She turned in his arms, studying his face. The medical team says everything is developing normally. They're quite excited about the first documented human Proxian hybrid. Just what every child wants to be. A scientific milestone, he said with a wry smile. Our child will be much more than that, she said softly. A symbol of what's possible when we look beyond our differences. The pregnancy had been unexpected. Their species were compatible, but fertility between them was supposed to be rare. The Alliance medical team called it a miracle of genetic harmony. Nylara called it fate. I never thought I'd have this, she admitted, her hand covering his where it rested on her stomach. A future, a family, someone who knows everything about me and loves me anyway. Not anyway, he corrected gently. Because of everything you are, your strength, your courage, Even your stubbornness. She arched an eyebrow. My stubbornness? Especially that? He laughed, pulling her closer. It's what kept you alive long enough for me to find you. You mean for you to see my scar by mistake? She teased. Best mistake I ever made, he murmured against her lips before kissing her. As the stars streaked by outside, Nilara marveled at how a moment of accidental discovery had led to this. Freedom, purpose, love. The geometric pattern on her back was gone now, removed by Alliance medical technology, leaving only the faintest trace to remind her of where she'd been. But it was Mark who had truly healed her, showing her that being human wasn't about biology or origin. It was about connection, compassion, and the courage to trust someone else with your heart. And that was a lesson worth all the scars in the universe.